Hopefully you can see me okay. A lot of people have been asking the question if my tax dollars, if all of the social safety nets that they funded keep getting cut and my tax dollars are going toward the United States government committing acts of terrorism domestically and abroad, why should I pay my taxes? And then there's a lot of fear about tax evasion. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but here's my understanding. You want to pay your taxes. You're not evading paying your taxes. You just do not want to commit the crime of financing terrorism. And you would be delighted to pay your taxes if the United States government were not going to use some of that money to commit acts of terrorism. So, I'm holding in my hand the International Convention for the Suppression of the Financing of Terrorism. I'm going to read a couple things from it, but I suggest reading the whole thing. I would read a lot more than I'm going to, other than part of the issue is that it's very self-referential, so I can't highlight my favorite parts without also highlighting the previous things that it references. But anyway, I think a lot of people are worried that, it's criminal to avoid paying taxes. Well, you aren't really avoiding it if you are willing, and especially if you're willing to pay back taxes when the government is no longer funding different acts of terrorism. So, I want to focus on three specific things regarding United States terrorism very recently. One is the bombing of the girls' school in Iran. It was the United States bombed and killed 180 civilian grade schoolers, and the threat of the United States to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age if they don't open the Strait of Hormuz, and also what is now yesterday was Easter, and there was a direct threat from the United States government stating that civilian infrastructure would be targeted, and among the civilian infrastructure was power plants, and power plants are needed to keep food storage, keep food refrigerated. Power plants are needed for hospitals. That infrastructure impacts people in a lot of different ways, and so it is, without any possible good faith argument, the targeting of civilian infrastructure is terrorism, right? And we will, in fact, let's just get right to, what should I read first? Let's get to the crux of it. I want to read this Article 2. This is, any person commits an offense within the meaning of this convention if that person, by any means, directly or indirectly, unlawfully and willfully, provides or collects funds with the intention that they should be used, or in the knowledge that they are to be used, in full or in part, in order to carry out terrorism or the financing of it. Now, I'm bracketing those last two things because it then goes to list out exactly what it means. And in the context of this, and this is pretty consistent with international terrorism law, if you want to look at a deeper dive, I have an article on my Substack called It's Time You Understand What Terrorism Actually Means, where I go through Ben Saul's work of the past 100 years of international terrorism law in treaties and in proposed definitions and so on and so forth. But Article 2 of this, all right, Section B. Any other act intended to cause death or serious bodily injury to a civilian or to any other person not taking an active part in the hostilities in a situation of armed conflict, when the purpose of such act, by its nature or context, is to intimidate a population or to compel a government or an international organization to do or to abstain from doing any act. So, the intended cause of death or serious bodily injury to civilians, we see the United States doing that in Lebanon in terms of its undying support for Israel, as well as the terrorist actions Israel commits in Palestine. In addition to that, it's like I said, we could go into way more examples of United States committing terrorist crimes, but the act intended to cause death or serious bodily injury to a civilian, bombing a residential school, is exactly that. And then, when the purpose of such an act, by its nature or context, is to intimidate a population, check. We know this by open threats, right? Or to compel a government or an international organization to do or abstain from doing any act. On Easter, the White House Post stating that if the Strait of Hormuz is not opened to the liking of the United States government, that they were effectively going to be bombed. Their civilian infrastructure was going to be devastated. Weeks prior, there was that threat that Iran will be bombed to the Stone Age if it, ceases to hold the Strait of Hormuz the way that it is. And there's one more thing that I really want to get into in terms of like your responsibility as a person. There's this term, civil or administrative sanctions, such as sanctions which may include monetary sanctions. So you as an individual, in order to, in your refusal to commit the crime of funding or of financing terrorism, you are sanctioning temporarily, you're sanctioning the U.S. government as an individual taxpayer. That is in accordance with international law. All right. Let me see if there's any last. I suggest you read the whole thing. I would like to read a lot more of it, but again, like I said, it's very self-referential. But the sanctioning of the U.S. government, this is something that I wrote in the margins, for committing crimes of terrorism is not tax evasion, but rather emblematic of the consent of the governed requiring that the U.S. behave in accordance with international law and human rights. So, again, you're not evading taxes. You can't wait to pay your taxes. But you are not going to commit the crime of financing terrorism, and that can all end, and you can go back to being, you can feel no moral qualms once the United States behaves in accordance with international law and human rights. Also, there was a little thing right up front about sovereignty. Let me read this. All right, because this was a previous declaration, the Declaration on Measures to Eliminate International Terrorism, in which states members of the United Nations, such as the United States, solemnly reaffirm their unequivocal condemnation of all acts, methods, and practices of terrorism as criminal and unjustifiable, whenever and by whomever committed. So, exceptionalism be damned, terrorism is wrong. That is what this is saying, and this is something that the United States is a signatory to, including those which jeopardize the friendly relations among states and peoples and threaten the territorial integrity and the security of states. That is, the United States is very much threatening the integrity, territorial integrity, and the security of foreign states.